in one of your books, you talk about success is determined by your daily agenda.
Yes.
And so this book, Thinking for a Change, this book, Today Matters, all of your work kind of drives toward this. So I would love to talk about this idea of daily agendas from your perspective, John, but then certainly to you, James. And then again, John, go for it with your questions. But let's talk about daily agendas and their impact on long-term success.
James, what Mark is talking about there is I wrote a book called Today Matters a long time ago. And basically the thesis of the book is that if I could spend a day with you, I could pretty much at the end of the day tell you how successful you are, because the secret of our success is determined by what we do daily. It's the daily habits. And so I've talked about that a lot. And I think one of the reasons your book connected so much with me is that you have a terrific way of expressing and teaching that is very practical. But every time I read one of your illustrations or your next principle, it was like I'm thinking, I've thought this, but James just wrote it. It was like you clarified it. I mean, it was like, okay, inside you're agreeing with that, but on the outside, you visually, with the written word, just, I think, really bring the aha moment to the person that's felt it, but never quite expressed it as clearly as you have.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I actually think that's one of the best compliments that I can get as a writer, which is, I've always kind of thought this, or this matches up with my personal experience, but I've just never quite heard it put that way. And I think a lot of what I try to do, I try to hit that mark or hit that target. And I'll have readers come up to me and they'll say, hey, I had one guy come up. He said, I'm training for the Boston Marathon. Like, I've been doing so many of the things in this book, and I just never realized it or didn't really think about it that way. And a lot of this really resonated with me because I've been doing this stuff for years. And I thought, wow, what a great proof of concept. Like, that made me feel really good about the book. Like, here's somebody who's getting real results in the world. And they're like, yes, this is exactly what's worked for me. I just didn't have a language for it. I just didn't have a way to express it. And so, to a large degree, I'm not really saying anything new. I'm just trying to find maybe a different line of attack or a slightly different explanation or a story that kind of brings the concept to life. I'm just trying to take these things that have been true for a very long time and useful in many different contexts and put them in a way that's easy to understand and easy to apply. And so my real job is the distilling of the idea or the principle into something actionable rather than coming up with something brand new.
And you did it well. And if you don't mind, I'd like to talk about the ice cube for a moment, okay? Because it's such a beautiful illustration of our work is stored up before it shows up. And I think a big miss for a lot of us, James, is that in the stored up stage of our life, we get discouraged. And we just say, well, I've been working on this. Nothing is happening, which we know things are happening, but we don't see it. So, and of course, then use the same illustration basically as the hammering the rock, and on the 1,000th hit, all of a sudden it breaks or cracks in the process. So I'd like you to teach this, because I just feel it is so encouraging to people that are trying to get some good habits, but sometimes the stored up stage just kind of is a little discouraging for them because they're looking for something tangible to see.
Well, one of the great challenges with building better habits is that you show up and you do the right thing, and then you feel like you don't have anything to show for it. Like, take my parents, for example. They like to swim. And one of the challenging things about swimming is their body looks exactly the same when they get out of the water as it did when they jumped in, right? Like, they have no physical evidence that workout was worth it. It's only months or maybe even years later that you get kind of the physical results you were hoping for. Or we can all think of like work projects. Maybe you have a team meeting, you're meeting every week to work on this feature, to ship this product, and it's 6 months in and the thing is still a mess. You haven't shipped it yet. Or, I'm sure, John, you've had this before with book manuscripts. I know that I have this with Atomic Habits. I've been working on this thing for a year and a half and it's still unfinished, and like, it's very easy to get discouraged in those moments because you're like, I thought I was doing the thing I'm supposed to do, but I still don't have the result I was hoping for. And I like to encourage people to think about this kind of metaphor of an ice cube. Imagine you walk into a room. It's cold. You can see your breath. Say it's like 25, 26 degrees. The ice cube sitting on the table. And you slowly start to heat the room up. 27, 28, 29, ice cube still sitting there, 30, 31. And then all of a sudden you get to 32 degrees and it's this 1 degree shift, no different than the other shifts that have just come before. But suddenly you hit this phase transition and the ice cube melts. And a lot of the time working on your habits or trying to get better results in life is kind of like that. You show up and you keep making these small improvements and nothing happens. And you just have to wait until you hit the phase transition for that kind of moment to occur. And that work that you were putting in, it wasn't wasted. It was just being stored, kind of like complaining about running for a month and not seeing a change in your body, for example, is sort of like complaining about heating an ice cube up from 25 to 30 degrees and it not melting yet. It's like, well, you just haven't hit the phase transition. And there are a lot of things in life that are like that. And I think that doesn't necessarily mean this is going to feel easy all the time, but knowing that that is a reality and that work is often stored, and you have to wait to get to that moment where it's revealed, just knowing that is true puts you in a slightly better mindset to handle the difficulty of showing up again and needing to continue banging on the rock before it finally splits.
Yeah, I just love the illustration. It makes all the sense in the world. And I think that, again, for many of us, the stored up stage, we have to understand that the real work is done in the stored up stage as much as it is in the showed up stage. It's just we don't get visually rewarded for it. And so therefore we get a little bit discouraged. Another thing that you said that I would love for you to talk about, you talked about goals and systems.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
And in the goals and systems, the way you said it was better than the way I said it. But let me just give you a little background. When I started off as a young leader, I set a lot of goals. I took goal setting seminars and did goal setting practices. And then one day I began to understand that I would hit a goal and then I kind of look and say, well, what's next? And I felt that there was a missing piece. And so I kind of shifted from being goal-oriented to growth-oriented. I still had goals in my life, but I said, I want to grow in this area. I want to grow in the leadership lane. And so, but when I saw that you talked about the systems, which are the processes, it's the process. I love that because I felt when you spoke of that this is a big miss with a lot of people, that they are kind of outside directed with the goals and they don't have that process, that system that allows them to really long-term sustain and continue to go beyond your, because I say if you're growth oriented, you'll hit a goal and you'll say that's nice, but you just keep on going because it's bigger than that. If you're goal oriented, sometimes you say, what do I do next? Okay, pick up on that one and take us to a new level, James.
Well, I mean, first of all, this is coming from someone who was very goal-oriented for a long time. I think in a lot of ways, everything I write in Atomic Habits is actually a little reminder to myself. I make all of these same mistakes that everybody else makes. And so I kind of am coming up with these ideas because I need them. But I came across this sheet of paper a couple years ago, and it had a list of goals that I had written out to myself, like maybe 10 years prior. And it was kind of interesting looking through them with that much distance from them, because maybe 30% of the list or something were things that I had accomplished. And then the rest of the list were things I hadn't. And my first thought looking at it was, well, clearly writing the goal down wasn't the thing that made the difference. Like obviously if that would have been the secret, then I should have just hit them all. And what I realized looking at it was the ones that I made progress on were the ones that I had some kind of system around. And we often tell these stories about behavior change and habits and how hard it is to build new habits, how difficult it is to change your behavior and all of that. And one of the stories that we will tell is something like, well, maybe if you really wanted it, maybe if you had better goals, maybe if you had more discipline, maybe if you had more grit. And, I don't know that that's quite right. Certainly those are important qualities in life. But I think many people, certainly most people like listening to this conversation right now, genuinely do want to improve, genuinely do want to perform at a high level. So what I would say is if you're struggling to improve, the problem isn't you. The problem is your system. We don't change, not because we don't want to change, but because we have the wrong system for change. And I think we can even go a step further and say, listen, you don't rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems. So often in life, we're told you need to be more ambitious, set a bigger goal, think bigger, 10x your vision. And thinking big has its place. Like, I consider myself to be someone who thinks big, but the truth is setting the goal is kind of the easy part. Like I'm an author, right? Like, I set a goal to sell 100 million books. It took me 3 seconds. Like, the goal is not the hard part. It's building a system of behaviors that executes and carries you toward that outcome. And so what I would say is, if I was going to put a little finer point on this language, what do I mean by goal and system? Your goal is your desired outcome, the target, the thing you're shooting for. What is your system? It's the collection of daily habits that you follow. And if there is ever a gap between your goal and your system, if there's ever a gap between your desired outcome and your daily habits will always win. Almost by definition, your current habits are perfectly designed to deliver your current results. So whatever system you've been running, whatever collection of habits you've been following for the last, say, 6 months or year or 2 years, it's carried you almost inevitably to the outcomes that you have right now. And that's kind of one of the great ironies of life. We also badly want better results. We also badly want to make more money or reduce stress or be more productive or get in shape. But the results are not actually the thing that needs to change. It's like, fix the inputs and the outputs will fix themselves. Design a better system, create a better collection of daily habits, and you'll be carried kind of naturally to a different destination. And that's why sometimes I'll say, like, goals are for people who care about winning once. Systems are for people who care about winning repeatedly. If you want to get results again and again, then it's the system that drives you forward. So that's kind of my little take on systems and goals.
I love what you just said there. That was great. I'll write that down and give you credit somewhere.
That's great. That's great.
So let's stay a little bit kind of in that same territory, because one of the things I loved about Atomic Habits, James, it makes sense. It just makes sense. When you read it, you not only can understand it and apply it, it makes sense. And when you talked about the difference between becoming outcome-based or identity-based on goals and where you're going, when I read that whole section, I thought, that is right and reasonable. And, I've got a cigarette habit, and I'm trying to quit smoking versus I don't smoke. I mean, that I felt was just very impacting. So take us there a little bit, would you please?
Well, I think this is pretty natural. I certainly have done it many times before. A lot of the time when you want to change something or get a better result, you'll sit down and first you start thinking about, what do I want to achieve? So what outcome do I want? And then if you go a little bit beyond just dreaming about the outcome, you say, okay, well, I need some kind of plan. I need some sort of process for this. And so you might say, just as an example, I want to lose 40 pounds. And so my plan is I'm going to go to the gym 4 days a week and I'm going to eat this new diet and so on. And usually it kind of stops there. And the implicit assumption kind of behind all of this is, if I can follow this plan and get that result, then I'll be the kind of person that I want to be, or I'll be happier with who I am, or I'll be more satisfied with my results, or something like that. And what I encourage in chapter 2 of the book is, let's maybe flip that on its head for a minute and just say, hey, why don't we just start by asking ourselves, not what do I want to achieve, but rather, who do I wish to become? And then you can build your habits around that identity and let that process kind of carry you forward. And then whatever results happen to bubble up along the way are the results that come along the way. And so I sort of think of it kind of like the layers of an onion. The outermost layer is your outcomes. One layer in is your process. And then the core of the onion is your identity. And what I've found is that, and I think many readers would agree with this, the concept of trying to build identity-based habits, of starting with who do you wish to become, is more resilient for them because they can kind of carry it around from situation to situation. So for example, one reader, she had this concept of this identity of, what would a healthy person do? And then whenever she walked around, she would just ask herself that question all day. What would a healthy person do? Would they order the salad or order the burger and fries? What would a healthy person do? Would they walk, 5 blocks to the next meeting, or would they catch a cab, or, whatever? And they can walk around all day long with that kind of identity in their mind. And that gives them a lens to make their daily decisions. and they start to feel more aligned with becoming the kind of person they want to be. Now, my big takeaway for this, and I think the way in which it ties into all of the concepts in Atomic Habits and the strategies for building small habits and getting better, is that your behavior provides evidence of your identity. And so every action you take is like a vote for the type of person you wish to become. So no, doing one push-up does not transform your body, but it does cast a vote for I'm the type of person who doesn't miss workouts. And no, writing one sentence may not finish the novel, but it does cast a vote for I'm a writer. And individually, those actions are small things, but collectively you start to build up this body of evidence for the type of person you are and what you stand for. And ultimately, I think this is the real reason that habits matter, which is they provide evidence for who you are. You know, we often talk about habits as mattering because of the external results they'll get you. Hey, they'll help you make more money or reduce stress or whatever. But the real reason they matter is they shape your sense of self. They kind of shape that narrative, that story that you have about who you are and what you do. And habits are not the only things in life that influence that picture or that story. But by virtue of being repeated day in and day out, habits provide the bulk of the evidence. They play a really significant role in shaping the way you see yourself. And so once you start to believe that you're that kind of person, you have every reason in the world to stick with the behavior, you know, like, especially once you take pride in it. I always joke, like, if you take pride in the size of your biceps, you never skip arm day at the gym, you know? And once you start to take pride in a certain habit, it becomes easier to stick to it. Like the person who views themselves as, I am a runner, they don't have to motivate themselves to go for a run in the same way that somebody who's just getting started might. You know, it's kind of like, no, like this is just part of what I normally do. It's part of who I am. And so ultimately, I think that's where we're trying to get to. Now, it's hard to flip a switch on day one and just change your identity overnight. It usually doesn't happen that way. It's a gradual thing. It requires the casting of many votes, to continue that metaphor, and building up a body of evidence. But I do think it's possible. And a lot of the other tools and strategies in the book maybe can give you the short-term motivation that you need to get to that long-term place of kind of reshaping your story or shaping your identity.
Hey, I love how John, this standout statement, there are more things that unite us than divide us. And I think as we dig into this today, I've really thought through how many times I've had to make this shift. It seems like every positional change that I have the natural tendency to go to directing, when really I know that connecting is a better shift for people in senior level positions.
Well, as you said early in your intro, there are a lot of things that differentiate us. And now more than ever, it does seem like there's this in our culture, speaking of organizational cultures or teams we work in, that it's contentious, it's fractured. And what I love about this is that, you know, we have to look for it. To your point, sometimes we naturally, as you mentioned, you naturally may go back to a directing side of things. Some of that is easier for others than it may be for you.
Right.
But you got to do it. You got to go look for it. The other thing it made me think about as we're talking about this is John's 5 levels of leadership. You know, it's kind of my mantra, and he talks about the foundation for your influence as an individual really is found at level 2. And he talks about people giving you the permission to lead them because of building relationships. I think you can take the word relationships and connect.
I agree.
And interchange them. And before we dive into this, because I love the fact that John gave us 7, I don't know about you, I can't get through all 7 of these, but if I just work on 1 or 2 of them. Mm-hmm. But he gave us 7 ways to find common ground with people that are on our team. John has taught us for a long time, we're going to believe in, we're going to value people, and we're going to unconditionally love them. And if that's the case, we've got to find this common ground. So he starts off by talking about, hey, the difference between directing and connecting. I'm going to pick 2 of them, and I just want you to respond to them, okay? That stood out to me. The first one, he says, directing is really a top-down. It's really almost like a somewhat of an authoritative, but hierarchy kind of thing, versus connecting is we're doing this together. We're side by side. Talk about that in your leadership and then being under John's kind of tutelage, how you've learned to lead that way as well.
Well, I think a lot of times you see leaders that use their position to power through their agenda or power their wishes or directives on people. It's my position. It's kind of like the parent that looks at the kid and says, because I said so.
Yeah,
you know.
that's right.
I remember a time where John has told this story many times. He's told it on this podcast, to where John was sitting in a restaurant in Atlanta. Somebody came up to him and said, "Hey, John, I'm such and such name, and I'm a new employee. I work for you." And John said, "Whoa, wait, sit down right here. You don't work for me. You work with me." I spend a lot of time, Chris, because I think the common language of a leader, especially a directing leader, is I want y'all. This is what I want. This is what I've been thinking. And I work hard to eliminate I when I'm giving directives and go we.
Yeah.
This is what we need to do. This is our vision. This is what we can do together. And I think really challenge yourself as a leader to listen to your language, because you may want to think that you're a collaborative leader, but your language, your words really matter.
Yeah.
We teach that in multiple cases. I think it's really important here. I think top-down leadership can come from a pure place. It's my responsibility. Most recently, I've been leading our organization, and I felt for a while that what I wanted us to accomplish was all my responsibility, or I have thought in certain times shortfalls in our progress is my responsibility. And I think that's good. That's noble. But I also think it can be an Achilles heel because you don't let others feel the responsibility of we are here, not I am here. I'm going to single-handedly get us out. So I think there's some noble reasons people feel top down. It's high responsibility, high sense of ownership, but I think it can be a detriment too because it doesn't let others feel that weight with you.
Yeah. What I love about what you just said is yes, as leaders, we got to take responsibility. We're not saying leaders, you're not responsible.
Yeah.
You are. You do have to carry the weight of that. But what I love about what you said is if you are assuming it's I and it's my weight and it's this, you then return, right? And you go, I want us to do this.
Yeah.
And I think that shift of using that language, we, is so strong. Like imagine if you're leader, if you're walking alongside your team and they're like, hey, I work for this lady. No. We work together.
Yeah.
We're on a team together. Imagine that language together. I remember when John said it to me for the first time. To your point, you're just like, John, who are you kidding? Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, what is going on here? So I love that. One more kind of just quick response out of you. John says directing is really my agenda. It's about me versus connecting it's about your agenda.
Yeah.
Unpack that for us.
Well, I love this one too. I taught in a podcast that for a long time I worked and it was John's agenda, and then it became our agenda, and then it came back to my agenda, and that's from a vision standpoint. I think so many of us are so challenged with political leaders right now, church leaders right now, because they're so caught in their agenda that they forgot they serve the people. I think I think there is, understand this. John's teaching this because he's teaching from his book, Leadership. I'm holding it up for the YouTube viewers right now. He's teaching from this. Understand, he's not saying one is wrong and one is right. He's saying that there are times in our leadership that we need to shift and effectively lead what's going on. And I think that it's okay from a vision standpoint to say, hey, this is what I believe we need to do. But then very quickly, you've got to get that into an our agenda. Let them see their face in the flag is what I've said on a previous podcast. So I do believe that the best leaders, the most effective leaders, the leaders that are more sustainable in their influence are the leaders that have figured out how to make the people's agenda their agenda.
That's good.
Here is John Maxwell.
I want to share with you 3 major differences between successful and unsuccessful people. Number 1 is in the area of thinking. Here's the difference. Successful people daily think realistically about their problems and positive ways to approach them. Very simply stated, successful people daily think realistically about their problems and positive ways to approach them. In fact, Max Dupree, a great leadership writer, says the first responsibility of a leader is to define realism.
Now, successful people, what do? They think realistically about their problems and positive ways to approach them. Unsuccessful people, are you ready? Here's the difference. It's in the area of thinking. Unsuccessful people daily think unrealistically about their problems and hope that everything works out. They think unrealistically about their problems, and they just hope that everything works out. Let me just say here today, hope is not a strategy. Now, do you see the difference in thinking? Successful people think realistically about their problems and a positive way to approach them. Unsuccessful people think unrealistically about their problems and hope that everything works out. Let me give you the second area that's different between successful and unsuccessful people. The first one was thinking. The second one is feeling. Let me give you the difference. There's a difference in feeling. The feeling of a successful and the feeling of an unsuccessful person are drastically different. Successful people know that their behavior determines their feelings. Unsuccessful people allow their feelings to determine their behavior. You see the difference? Big difference. Thinking, feeling, those are two major differences between successful and unsuccessful people. Let me give you one more. Doing. Let's talk about action for a moment. Doing. Successful people initiate and complete. In other words, successful people have the ability to start and finish. In fact, I call those the bookends of success. You got to have the ability to start. You have to have the willingness to finish. Unsuccessful people fail to do both. And there's a huge difference between those two. That's why I say in your notes, 95% of achieving anything is knowing what you want and paying the price to get it. It's almost always a price issue. I have a wonderful friend named Van Crouch who's written some good books, and one of them is entitled Winning 101. And this is not in your notes, so just sit back and relax for about a minute. Let me read you a few paragraphs from his book, Winning 101, because this is so key to the habits that we create that allow us to be either successful or unsuccessful. Here's what Van Crouch says. Listen. An inspiring young writer once made an appointment to interview a well-known author, and the author asked him, "Why do you want to see me?" And the young man responded, "Well, I'm a writer too, and I was hoping that you could share with me some of the keys to your success." "Well, what have you written?" the author asked. "Nothing," said the young man, "at least nothing that is finished." The writer rose from his chair and then asked, "Well, if you haven't written anything, what are you writing?" "Well, I'm in school right now, so I'm hoping to find time to write down some ideas." The author began to walk slowly toward the door, asking one final question as he showed the young man out. "Why do you call yourself a writer if you aren't writing?" When the young man gave no answer, the author said to him, "Writers write, composers compose, painters paint, workers work. What you do, to a great extent, defines what you become, and in turn, what you are gives rise to what you do. When what you do externally matches what you are internally, greatness will not be denied." You know what the writer was saying to him that day? The writer was defining to him the difference between successful and unsuccessful people. This young aspiring writer wasn't writing, but when he finished school, he would. Or when the convenient time was, he would. Or when the opportunity arose and he got that kind of a job, he would. And the writer was saying the only way that you ever learn to write is by writing. And don't wait for a convenient time to write, just start writing. Writers write, composers compose, workers work. In other words, he was saying the only way that you'll ever learn, the way that you'll only grow, is to get in the habit of writing. You see, people look at me and they just think there's something mystical and magical about writing books. Like someday I just sit in a wonderful leather chair in a beautiful office that looks out over the ocean and just out of thin air, in a few hours, produce a book. No. In 1979, I wrote my first book called Think on These Things. Now, whenever you read that book, it's still out. In fact, they just had a 20th edition of it. Every chapter is very short, only about 3 pages per chapter. Somebody came up to me the other day and said, "Oh, that's so clever to have short chapters." I said, "Clever nothing. I didn't have anything else to say." I did about 3 pages and ran out of gas. I can remember still in Indiana one day as I was going to speak in the evening, and I had all day to write, and I'm trying to write my first book, and I got my legal pad out in the hotel room, and nobody was going to bother me, and I thought I'll have lunch brought in to my room so I can just keep writing, and I'm just going to write all day, and I had these visions at the end of the day of having a legal pad full of wisdom. At the end of the day, I had just a little bit more than 1/2 page of a legal pad written, and 2 waste paper baskets full of wadded up legal pages. And I remember that day I looked at myself and I said, I'm never going to be a writer. I'm never going to be able to do this. I'm not a good writer. I'm slow. What I write isn't any good. Only my mother will buy this. And that's if she has an off day. But I just kept writing. And the only way I've ever known how to write, this will just confound you amazingly, the only way I've ever learned how to write is 1 word at a time. And sometimes it's 2 words, strike out 3, and try it again. Forward a little bit, backward, forward some more, backward, forward some more, whether it's writing or whether it's leading. How do you learn to lead? By leading. Oh, that's a thought, isn't it?
Leadership develops daily, not in a day. When I do Q&A in conferences, the most popular question people ask me is somebody raise their hand and say, "John, are leaders born?" And whenever they ask me the question, "Are leaders born?" I give them the same answer. I mean, of course they are. I mean, think about it for a moment. I've never met an unborn leader, and neither have you. What they're really asking is not, are leaders born? What they're really asking are there people that are born with leadership skills, and so they get to the front of the line, and some people, they just have none at all, so they go to the back of the line? That's what they're really asking. And what I want you to understand is that you can learn to lead. I wrote a book called Developing the Leader Within You. The book is all about the fact that you have leadership potential within you right now. But if you learn to lead, it won't be in an event, it will be in a process. In other words, you can't learn to lead by just reading one book or coming to one event. In fact, one of the things that excites me about Mastermind is you come in and week out. You continually are immersed in the subject of leadership with your executive director. Here's what I know. We have a tendency to overestimate the event, the moment, and we have a tendency to underestimate the process. And it's the process that's key. We want to microwave our leadership. We want to get our leaders into a microwave and push some numbers and zap them. And that's why we have so many Pop-Tart leaders running around. No, we don't want to do that. We want to crock-pot a leader. We want that process to come and marinate them so they can be the very best that they potentially can become. You see, an event, which is important, it won't develop you as a leader, but it can get you started as a leader. An event is something that encourages you to maybe make a decision to be a leader. It can be motivating. It's something you put on your calendar. It can be challenging. It's usually quite easy because it's over quickly. It's something you do and then you're kind of done. Now, a process, it encourages development, and it may motivate you, but what it's really going to do is it's going to mature you. It's a culture issue. It helps you to change behavior, which changes you. It's longer and it's more difficult. What I want you to understand about the law of process is this. This mastermind is the beginning of hopefully a lifelong development of your leadership. It lasts a few weeks, so it's already part of a process. But I want you to get into the habit of learning and studying and being with other potential leaders, because that journey will serve you well for the rest of your life. You're not going to get to the end quickly, but that's okay. It's the journey that makes the leader. and brings out the greatness in their life.
Hey, welcome back. Tracy and I are excited about unpacking this and giving some application. You know, Tracy, I'm reminded of Jim Ryan's quote. He's an Olympian. He said, motivation gets you started. Habits is what keep you going. And for those of you that are in the habit of the podcast this year, kudos. That's a positive habit. But we've got to develop a winner's mindset. We're now, this year is slipping by us. And we need to be a winner this year, and it starts in the mind. So, Tracy, I'm glad to have you back. Love debriefing these with you.
I love debriefing these with you, and I'm excited to dive right into number 4. He gets right into the meat of it. Success lies in forming the habit of doing things failures don't like to do. So let's just kick it off by asking you, Mark, what would you say are the top 3 habits that serve you well in your leadership journey?
You know, boy, I love this question. She did not prep me with this question, but the top 3 habits would absolutely be, it would be my year-end review process. When I, 20 years ago, determined that every year I was going to have a year-end review, it made a difference for me. And so I plan out my year. I've designed my life around 5 pillars. And I take those pillars and I create growth trajectory, growth expectation around those in any given year. And then at the end of the year, this is all part of my process, I review those to make sure that I have done what I said to plan. And then I give myself a grade. Did I do it well? And then I set the course and the plan for the next year. So that would be one habit that is a game changer for me. And now, 45 days after the beginning of the year, I'm still allowing that growth plan to drive my daily activities. The second thing that I would say, Tracy, is absolutely, it's all about an inner circle. My wife, Stephanie, is the advisor of my personal progress. She is the advisor of my personal counsel. And I bring her into that growth plan. I hold the plan accountable to her. I have other inner circle members that are super important to me in driving the progress and the process of my personal growth. So my inner circle would be the second habit, engaging them, inviting them in. Tracy, just before we started recording today, I said, Tracy, what's your word for the year? I want to hear it. And I'll share with you mine when we have a little bit more time. And then what did we say to each other? Keep us accountable. Keep us accountable. That's an inner circle discipline that is a difference maker in what has happened and shaped me with my mindset and with my progress. The third, I talked about this a little bit last week, but I got to talk about it again. The third for me is environment. What environments am I placing myself in? Tracy, I go all the way back to a habit of reading books, asking people to mentor me, discipline number 2. But discipline number 3 was absolutely, what are the environments I'm going to attend in a given year that's going to make me better? I talked about it last week. I'm going to talk about it again this week. If you're new, this is brand new for you. If you're not and you're listening to this again, this is a reminder and a kick in the seat of the pants saying, why haven't you registered yet? Because on March the 13th in Orlando, Florida, Tracy and I are going to be part of a group of presenters that's going to challenge people to grow day in and day out. We're going to have Pat Lencioni, Valerie Burton. Of course, none other than John Maxwell is going to be there. We're going to have Tim Elmore, Jeff Henderson. We've got a menu of people that's going to be designed to help you grow and develop yourself. My question to you is, are you in an environment that calls things failures or calls things lessons? That's what we're talking about in this point. And I can promise you this, March the 13th in Orlando will make a difference in your life. There's 2 ways that you can attend. 1, come to Orlando and let Tracy and I meet you. You're our podcast family. We want to meet you. We want to greet you. 2, if you can't get to Orlando on such a short notice, you can actually sign up for our virtual experience, which is the same programming, the same challenges, the same content, the same opportunities to grow. You can find more information for both of these options, in person or virtual, at maxwellleadership.com/personal growth day. Tracy, again, I'm going to tell you, for me, creating an environment, having an inner circle that keeps me accountable, and putting a plan together is how I've made a habit of growing and not allowing failures like John was talking about to stop me, but actually to start me on a new growth of journey.
So Perry, let's talk about the 4 things that we have learned from this past year, or we're seeing themes around teams and organizations that we work with.
It's been a great year of learning. I think the first one that really resonated with me, that when we talked about this idea, was the way it was phrased was, we made bad habits in good times. And just to kind of put a little meat on that was, even though COVID threw us challenges over those years of 2020, 2021, even into 2022, a lot of organizations found business going up, that it became easier to sell what they sold. It became easier to do what they normally had to struggle to do. And they found that their teams resonated with the easier path. They got away from the basics, and they began just taking orders. And now that we are back to a new normal, but normal has come back, some of that ease of selling and working with clients has gone away. We're back to the way it was, but the team hasn't necessarily returned. As a matter of fact, they're complaining about how hard it is to do business now. And we realize, man, we developed some bad habits in good times. Do you remember that one?
I do. And then I think the other side of that too, right, is you develop good habits in bad times. And so one of the things that I think about this is, I go, how as a leader do I create an environment and a culture to where I go, man, listen, we got to develop some better habits around here. What are the habits of what we're doing? And so one of the ways I was thinking about was, I've had conversations with other leaders that are like, what if we had no resources? How would we do what we're doing? What if, and you create all these scenarios and you begin thinking and getting your team thinking a little bit differently about, how do I develop a better habit for what we're doing? And I know just recently, even with my team personally, we were talking about, how do we do a better job of scheduling some calls, right? Versus, oh, I'm just used to so-and-so responded and so-and-so responded, whatever it might be. I think as the leader, we need to make sure, whether you're in good times or bad times, that you're very aware of what are the processes and the systems. How are we looking for better ways? How are we curious about changing what we're doing in order to make sure we always have good habits?
Yeah, I think that the big lesson I learned from that as well was that a leader, call it focusing on the basics, but does everybody in your team know what the outcome they're supposed to be driving? And then what are we always have the lagging indicators, which is the scoreboard, which is, how are we doing? Did we make the number? Did we drive the revenue? Did we hit the subscriptions? Whatever it is you're doing. So we start putting in, what are the leading indicators? And so does your team know, if you're, for instance, one of the clients we dealt with had a sales organization and said, do you know what are the leading indicators of hitting that scoreboard lagging indicator? Well, yes, X number of prospecting calls a week, X number of customer lunches, X number of product demos, and X number of presenting proposals. Great. If you did those on a weekly basis and you track that, you know that you'll eventually get to the number. And it has to do with knowing what are the key indicators for our success and then doing them daily. But what we find in good times, I don't need to do all those prospecting calls. The prospects are walking on, they're calling us. And you're thinking, no, you still need to be doing those leading indicators that drive the success. And I thought, man, that was really an eye-opener to me. Was I think about Bill Walsh. He was the coach of the 49ers back in the day. And he wrote a book called The Score Takes Care of Itself. That what football coach ever said that? Yeah. But if you read about Walsh, he said he didn't worry about the scoreboard. He worried about the small things that every player must do day in, day out. Do your job is what Belichick calls it now. Do your job. Do you know what that is? And if you do those small things, execute on our organization, on our standard, we'll get there.
I want to come back to your example, because I was sitting to listen to you and I go, oh yeah, no, That's exactly right. Like we have what we know that it takes to get to that number on the scoreboard when we have good habits. But what ends up happening, that scoreboard starts going up and you haven't been doing all this and you're just like, so this is where it starts right here. This is where you let the slippery slope, you let the bad habits go. Okay, so now instead of 100 prospect calls, I only did 60 this week, and the number on the scoreboard still showed up. Yes, I saved myself 40 calls. Yeah. And then what ends up happening as it shifts, time shifts. It always will, by the way. Yep. It's going to ebb and flow. All of a sudden, you're not doing those 100 calls, and you look up there, and you're like, man, I'm nowhere even close to where I need to be. So just as you were talking about that, I was thinking through, what does that look like in real life to allow myself to get into a bad habit? It's not a quote-unquote bad habit, right? You're not going to get in trouble for it, but you're going to allow yourself to start slipping like that, and it's going to change the scoreboard.
I'm smiling because I'm thinking about in our team, they've had a great year, and they were showing you always make them report on how many prospecting calls they did. So they're doing those leading indicators. Yeah. But then you didn't stop there. He goes, I know that because you saw the green numbers, all the green on the report. You go, tell me about next week's call schedule. I thought that was a great movie. So I saw the calendar. He was flipping the calendar going, oh yeah, it's a little lower, but I've got, let's get those calls because just because it's showing up green now doesn't mean we back off on our daily disciplines. Do the things we know lead to the success to do that. So great lesson. I thought.
I'm excited to hear your response to this quote. It's one of my favorite quotes of yours. You say, you'll never change your life until you change what you do daily.
Yes.
The secret of your success is determined by your daily agenda. I'd love to know, what do you do daily that helps you impact lives and build your organization the way you do? What are some of your daily disciplines that are most helpful?
Well, I love that question, and I do believe this. I believe that we overestimate what we can do tomorrow.
Right.
And I think we over-exaggerate what we did yesterday. And I think especially when you're old like me, you sit there and, the good old days, I don't think the good old days were always that good. You know what I mean? But I do think, in fact, I know, we underestimate today. Mm-hmm. And it's the only moment I have. All I have is now. The only time I have. And that's why I tell people consistently, you have to live in the present. Be there. Be present. Whatever you're doing, do it well right now. So in my disciplines to make the day count, I have my spiritual disciplines of things that I do in my faith walk that I do on a daily basis. I pray scripture. I have my writing disciplines. I write always in the morning. In fact, one of my disciplines is that basically I don't meet with anybody until noon because I'm a morning person. I get up around 4:30 in the morning. And from 4:30 till about 10:30, 11, I am cooking. I mean, that's when I think best. That's when I write best. And I learned a long time ago. Now, you may be a night person, so you might flip that. But whenever you're at your best mentally, physically, that's when you ought to be doing your most important things and making that really count right then. But, who was it? I think Joe Frazier, the boxing champion, said that when you get into the ring, it shows up if you practiced or not and if you worked out. And what we do in secret will be revealed in public, right. And it's only a matter of time. And one other quick thought on this is I think that consistency is such an incredible asset to people that is totally underappreciated. Because consistency compounds. I'm 73, and I can tell you right now, the consistency of my life now is bringing fruit to my life that I'm surprised, and I think, how is this happening? But it's because of this continual day in, day out, teaching leadership to so many people. And after a while, all of a sudden, this return comes back that I would have never anticipated. So today, which we say is just today, doesn't seem so great. Several todays consistently done with the right reasons and the right priorities. One day shows up. And, hey, today, someday becomes what a day. Right. It comes, oh my gosh, what a day we've got here. Well, that day out there that we graduate from college or we get the promotion, that, when somebody graduates from college, everybody's congratulating them. Well, they didn't become successful when they got their diploma. They became successful when they enrolled in college and when they studied for the test and when they went to class. I mean, they're already successful. And I think sometimes we confuse success, which is required of us on a daily basis, with recognition of success.
Right.
Which that doesn't happen till someplace back there. We weren't that good when we got recognized, and we weren't that bad when we did the routine stuff that we needed to do to get recognized.
Yeah. I think that's so important, and I just kind of even want to highlight that for someone who's listening right now.
Yes.
Success isn't when you get the promotion or the book deal or launch your company or get acknowledged or get published or whatever. Success is when you're faithful today in doing the small things. And along your line of saying overestimating, underestimating, I had a mentor years ago, John, tell me that something that's very similar, but he said that you'll typically overestimate what you can do in the short run.
Yes.
And then he said, but you'll vastly underestimate what you can do through a lifetime of faithfulness. Question. And that's what you're talking about. I like the idea of consistency compounds. It's so
totally
true.
I was doing a leadership conference one time, and we were having a great day. There were a couple thousand people there. And I was in my last break, and I was signing some books, and a kid who was just getting his MBA came up to me. He was so excited. He said, "Oh man, I love this." He said, "I've decided I want to do what you do." And I said, "Well, that's great." I said, I have a question for you. He said, "What's that?" He's so eager. I said, "Would you like to do what I did?"
Right.
So you can do what I do. Uh-huh. See, the issue is not I want to do what you do. Everybody wants to do what somebody that's doing something really amazing does. I tell them, forget I want to do what you do and go to, well, am I willing to did what you did? You got to get in the did world before you can get into the do world. Yep. And so we had a nice conversation. But I think so many times we see the success of somebody and we kind of gravitate like, oh, I want to do that, not realizing there was a whole process of daily disciplines that got them there, and without those, they would have never had that day.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine somebody listening now, just they're in the didding part.
Yeah,
you got to did so you can do.
Yeah, and I tell them if they don't do the did, they're in deep doo-doo.
He also kicks off with talking about the uncomfortable things that are necessary in order to develop habits. And I love all of that. And then it leads into habits, develop actions, actions develop attitudes, and attitudes develop a lifestyle. And then he lands on 4 things. He talks about the goals that he makes, sets for himself, get areas that he gets comfortable, getting uncomfortable applying in these areas, which are intellectual and mental growth, physical growth, spiritual growth, and relational growth. 4 areas. Why, Mark? Those seem pretty simple because what are we? We are human beings. And as human beings, every leader is a human being. Every leader is body, mind, and spirit. That is your intellectual, your mental part, your physical body, your spiritual part of yourself, and your relationships with the other human beings. Why is this something that so many leaders miss? High-end leaders miss or at least neglect at least one of these. They're either very highly intellectual or they miss their physical or they miss the relational because they are so busy with the physical and the intellectual. There's at least a miss of something. Why is it, do you think?
Well, all 4 of those areas, and maybe for the rest of us, a 5th area, a 6th area, we all have pillars in our life that are very important. Tracy has definitely listed 4 that's very important in my life, and perhaps for most of you, those 4. And there may be a time or 2 more. But every one of those, we desire greatness, but we don't realize that greatness comes with the improvement every day. And so, Tracy, I think the reason that I would answer that is because we do not understand what John says so often. Consistency compounds. We make a health decision and we call it a New Year's resolution. And again, for all of you that are listening to this current, we're at the beginning of the year. 2024 is not going to be great because you made a New Year's resolution. In fact, 2024 is not going to be great because you've already done your workout before listening to Tracy and I this morning. It's going to be great when December comes around if you're still consistently living out the decisions you made today in January. It is the consistency compounds that is the difference maker. It's not the decision. People make decisions every single day. It's not the fact that you did it today that makes the difference. It's that you did it day over day, day after day, week after week, month after month. And here we are in December of 2024. And you can say, I have done that on a consistent basis. Consistency really does compound. So when John says you will change your life until you won't change your life until you change something you do daily, the LY in the daily is the important thing. Not you will change your life if you do something different today than you did yesterday. Because most of us go back tomorrow to what we did yesterday and forget the moment of today. Consistency compounds day over day, week over week, month over month.
So at the end of every year, we know that you have a time where you break away and you really look at your year past and you look at the year coming forward. And so these pillars that you have, I know that you identify certain things that you're going to do, but do you also have, and ways that you'll measure them in these pillars, do you also have something that you do with your team?
I do. So every beginning of every day, in fact, in 1 week from this podcast, we will have our State of the Union. And in our State of the Union, and really we call it our State of the Culture, in our yearly address, we began to talk about what we're going to accomplish this year as a team, what we are going to challenge each of our teammates to accomplish as an individual, and what we're going to accomplish with the mission, the vision, the purpose of our organization. Because oftentimes what happens, Tracy, for all of us, is we begin with a discipline in mind rather than an end in mind. And when I can begin an exercise routine with the end goal of running a marathon, I do better job with the daily discipline rather than say, I just want to run every day. When there is something, an objective, a carrot to be pushing for, things begin to happen in a much greater way. So if we want to have a better team, we want to be more profitable, we want to turn this business idea around, we begin by casting the vision of the outcome and then set the disciplines that's going to happen. Let me take a minute, Tracy. This is true for each of you listening today. For all of you, this is true of you that want to create a discipline today. In fact, I've asked our team, we tried this in December, it went so well, I've asked the team to create a process that will make you better as an individual. We call it Every Day with Purpose. And here's what I want to tell you. If you want to continue your journey of improving every day, we're offering all of you, our podcast listeners, this online course, Every Day with Purpose. Now, usually this course is $199, but because it's January, because you're listening to the podcast, and because I believe with all of my heart that it is your daily discipline of constant doing it day in and day out, consistency compounds, that will make this product your best friend. So this week, rather than $99 or $199, we're going to offer it to you for just $49. If you'd like to purchase this course for yourself or maybe a teammate, maybe a growth mate, just scroll down to the show notes and wherever you're listening and click the link and take the journey with us. And I'm going to challenge you first and foremost to go the way before you tell somebody else to go the way. Show the way before you try to get somebody else to show their growth. But do take somebody with you. And Tracy, again, it comes back to what I'm saying, and that is when consistency begins to compound, we look back and go, wow, I didn't know we were that good. You're not. But guess what? You're not as bad in the beginning as it feels like either. Over time, you will begin to be better, and it's because of consistency, not because you're actually all of that better. You're better because you consistently did it day in and day out.
That's right. And so I'm curious, now that you've established those things, and once you establish that with your State of the Culture, with your team, and I'm sure that people are looking to do that, even if they weren't planning on it before, they're maybe thinking of that for their team now. There's
a lot of change, Becky, that you and I are getting to lead through. We're getting to be defined in our leadership because some of the changes. You know, I'm reminded of Socrates' quote that says, the secret of change is to focus all of your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new. It's what John says. He says change is inevitable, but growth is optional. And Becky, a year ago, you and I, we sat down with each other and we said, you know what? The old is pretty good. Yesterday was really good. But boy, there is a brightness that's pulling us into the future. And have we not experienced some change over the last year?
We definitely have. And it's been quite a ride, and it's still quite a ride. I think it's amazing how we all get excited about change, talking about it, but then when it comes time to implement it, we find there's a few problems that we don't get excited about. And when you think of tackling these things, especially with change, why do you think we, as a leadership organization or any organization, why do you think it's so hard for us to actually move forward with that? I mean, I think myself in particular, it's easy to want to put off the hard things and want to tackle the easy things first.
Well, it's this thing that John talks about. Number one, change what needs to be changed, not what's easy. And we were talking right before we went live here, Becky, we were talking about this idea that for all of us, if you're a task person, and I'm not saying that I am or am not a task person, but I will tell you, I like to check some things off. I got my little boxes and I like to check them off. And so maybe that makes me a task person, but I think everybody likes a sense of accomplishment. I got that done. Let me move on to the next thing. And it's true that whether it's John or any of us that are teaching, we challenge people, don't get caught up in the trap of checking off the easy things and leaving to the last minute the most difficult things. And we say that a lot in responsibility or daily task. In change, it's even more of a warning that I want to sound, because if you try to change what's easy, you will never get to what's hard, because there's easy changes all around. We've got to work hard to get the changes that require the most energy, the changes that need to be done. We've got to really do a good job, Becky, in my opinion, to intentionally beginning to build that out, so that we can have the most energy to make those changes, no matter the difficulty of the task. It's about the importance or the priority of the task that we need to work toward, and when it comes to change.
It's true. And I love how he references the difference between a cosmetic change and a cultural change, because we're kind of living in that right now. We had this beautiful cosmetic change of everything from branding to logos. And as much as we thought that was going to be the hard part, that's not the hard part. Like, that's actually the fun, beautiful part. When it came time to actually culturally embrace those things, even changing the language that we use, I think you and I are still getting used to some of the change in the cultural side.
Well, it is. And you know, it's true. I made a miscalculation as a leader in 2021. So in 2020, we all led through COVID, and we really didn't know what we were doing. And most of us, we circled the wagons and kind of back to back, we faced the world, right? And we all kind of led like that. Well, in 2021, I began to say, okay, we're done circling the wagons. We're moving out to the promised land. Let's go to the frontier, and we're going to make this thing happen. And I think we did. I really was pleased with 2021, but I popularized in our leadership team a statement at the beginning of 2021. And I said, hey, today is the best day you're going to feel about this direction, this change, for the next 365 days. And we would laugh and we feel good about it. Well, I thought 2022 was coming and all the changes had been broadcast. And so now it was time to really run and have this hum and this just feeling of, wow, so this was what the difficulty of 2021 was. And the leadership miscalculation is that change takes longer and costs more than you ever anticipated. The leadership miscalculation is that while people said it and began to repeat it, actually doing it is different than saying it and repeating it. And I've found that in 2022, that the changes that we began to broadcast and popularize and cast vision for now 18, 24 months, really is now requiring more than language change. It's requiring behavioral change. And it's much harder to change behavior than it is language. Leaders, listen to that.
Yes.
It is much harder to change behavior than it is language. And Becky, you and I are getting to lead in some behavior change time.
Yes, there is. And that really is a reflection. I mean, John talks about disciplines all the time. Mark lives those disciplines every day. But I think that's where you go from even just behavior to those habits and disciplines, is that phrase that he talks about, inside out instead of outside in. It's easy to just repeat in one of our leadership meetings everything that Mark says, but to actually have that reflected in our language, our attitude, our culture, I think that's maybe the gauge that we start to look for as far as that inside out.
It is. You know, I'm intrigued. So John, he has so many good points in 2 and 3, but Becky, you just said something that sparked me to go to this remove barriers comment that John said. And I want to camp out here with you a little bit here because of what we're doing with Clear. Now, podcast listeners, podcast viewers, I hope you're viewing in today and getting to see Becky and I visually with our podcast. But I'm going to tell you how to get engaged with the clear growth strategy, the clear leadership trajectory that we want you on. And we'll explain all that in a little bit. Becky's running that, doing a phenomenal job. But I want to go from a content standpoint and talk about you and I and our leadership as we're building this. Now, let me be really clear with everybody. This is not a change in that John Maxwell has now written 86 books. He's given 12,000 plus speeches, and he says that every speech and every book can be synthesized to 5 categories: communication, leadership, equipping, attitude, and relationship. Communication, leadership, equipping, attitude, relationship. Clear. CLEAR. And so Becky and I have tasked ourselves to create a clear growth trajectory for any and everybody that will partner with us, and that will lead to a clear leadership enhancement for everyone that takes the journey with us. So we're on a clear growth and clear leadership passion. Becky, we think about it every day. We eat, sleep, dream. It keeps us up. It wakes us up. It's clear as on the brain. But the leadership ecosystem and the barriers to get that have been daunting, right?
Absolutely. It's easier said than done.
It is, and it's not because of a lack of vision. It's not because of a lack of excitement around a direction that will help a lot more people than we've ever helped before. It is because of the changes that are going to be required of us and the barriers to those changes.
Absolutely.
I want you to talk just a minute as a leader, and I'm almost flipping hats for a minute and going to interview you for 1 second here and go, talk to me. You've led it massive. You've led bigger revenues than we're leading right now. Talk to us a little bit about that leader that comes in and can see all those barriers and the level of challenge that presents to someone that's tasked with bringing about the change.
Yeah, there's definitely an aspect in leadership of being capable of painting a vision. And that vision has to be wide enough that everyone that you're talking to can attach themselves to it. And as we've all experienced, it's not something you can paint just once. It's a conversation that goes on and on and on. And there's always clarifying moments to bring people back around to make sure we're all on the right track. You know, I remember a very clear conversation you and I had about clear. It's hard to get away from that, by the way. Clear,
that's right.
Clear. But in that conversation, we talked about how we knew there were going to be growing pains. And again, it's easy to say that up front, and it's a little different when you start to experience them and then start removing barriers the way that Mark has with our Clear program. But there was a very real conversation where I had said, you realize some people are not going to see the vision that we see, or it's not where they want to go. And I remember when you said, you know what, Becky, in leadership, I'm going to open the doors to the train. I'm going to invite everyone in. I'm going to tell them this euphoric place that we're going and how they can be a part of it. But whether they get on board or not is completely up to them. And I think we've seen a little bit of that.
That Martin Luther King Jr. is the greatest leader in the world in this last century. And how powerful is that for John to say that? And so I love that you kicked off that quote, because I'm a huge fan of that. I mean, that's how that really is, you know, when we've been talking so much about how do we change our world, it is with love and by bringing light in. And John certainly highlights a lot of the light that Martin Luther King brought in. And so one of the things that I was thinking about when John first started out talking about the 3 key points of leadership, Mark, he said, leadership omits the use of coercive power. Leaders have a bias for action, and leaders act with respect for the values of their people. And that really makes me think of the transformation through values that we have been trying to pick up this mantle and carry it in this modern world into the world and now into the United States. And so as we look to honor the mantle that Martin Luther King Jr. carried and passed the baton really to our generation, how are we doing that? Kind of share that. I know many of our podcast listeners know what we're doing by bringing values-based lessons to kids, to adults, to professionals, to people who are just starting out. But talk about how we're trying to kind of carry that mantle in this modern world through transformation tables.
Well, in many ways, Tracy, we're not doing enough. In fact, let me say it differently. In most ways, we're not doing enough. It's what I call wake up power. I woke up this morning wanting to do more about valuing people, about leading during difficult time, to be honest with you, about creating positive change. So what I have found in leadership, and I think what John helped me with, I thought through for a moment. There's no way, even though I was born right around that time or at the end of Martin Luther King's life, I found myself relating to that time, and certainly leading during difficult times is something that we continue to have to do today. Think of COVID. Think of some of the things that we've dealt with in the last 2 years that's even centered in the U.S. around race. And yet here I go with answering your question to say, on many of the areas in life, in culture that needs positive change, there's so much more to be done. And yet in the life of every leader, we find ourselves every single day meeting a new obstacle, a new challenge. I mean, Tracy, go back 3 years ago and think about COVID and the idea of leading through COVID. Leaders that know how to create positive change, there is always a short supply of those leaders. And I think what John pulls out of the life of Martin Luther King, and I think what John modeled in this lesson points, is something that all of us need to find. It's substantive. It's the idea that with listening, this first trait that John brings up, we need to listen more. Right after many of you in the U.S. will know this name, as soon as I say it, right after George Floyd, I found that everybody wanted a statement. Everybody wanted to make a statement or to hear a statement. And yet I found many leaders saying, I'll tell you what I need to do. I need to quit making more statements and I need to start listening. And yet, isn't it interesting? Several years ago, what John pulled out of Martin Luther King's leadership life was the art of listening. Yeah. The art of slowing down and with love, in fact, to show love, to listen. And I think more than remembering something that might have been said, a statement that I would make, Tracy, to answer your question, I want people to remember from this podcast more of an action than a statement. And that action is listening. We listen, we love, we learn by creating an environment where those around us, their opinion, their life experience matters. And that's what great leaders that create positive change do. They listen to the point of allowing others to feel like their perspective or their point of view matters.
Mm-hmm. I love how John gave the 4 L's, talking about how Dr. King loved, and from that position of loving, he was listening. And I think the tension that we feel, especially when you talk about, for instance, George Floyd, or when you hear about racial injustice or things that stir your soul, that anger is involved in there. And I'm just so struck by how Dr. King came from a place of love and listened, and the power, back to that statement that you led with, the power that comes when you're stirred, when your anger comes from a place of, because you love people, you're mad at the injustice, what's wrong. And so you choose to listen. And I love that John really highlighted that, and that you highlighted that when we talk about values. You know, we do these. Go ahead.
You know what's funny, Tracy? I'm sorry. We're on Zoom today. For those of you that are not watching the podcast on YouTube, which you should, maxwellpodcast.com/YouTube. But if you're listening, Tracy, we got a little bit of delay because we're not in studio together on Zoom. And I'm sorry I had to interrupt you. I thought you were rapping right there. But let me say this. It elicits emotion that some it makes angry, or some it makes defiant, or others that it makes sad. John's been saying for the last couple of years, I'm leadership sad. Mm-hmm. And if you distill down his sadness, and you notice what we learned even in today's lesson, and by the way, come back next week after the Martin Luther King birthday celebration in the U.S., and we're gonna pull 3 more points from John Maxwell. But this passion to love despite the frustration that we observe with Martin Luther King today and in studying him, and this passion that John has of sadness because of the leadership deficit that our world has right now, especially that's been demonstrated over the last few years. It all has a root. And the root is that somehow we as people feel like we can devalue another human being. Mm-hmm. Somehow that our leadership position makes us more elite or more valuable than someone else, or our color or our culture or our perspective or our political party. All of this somehow puts us in a, quote, better category. By putting ourselves in, even in our minds, in a better category, we're devaluing another human being. And you cannot create positive change by demeaning someone else.
That's right.
You can't.
That's right.
There's no such thing. There's no positive change in saying, I'm better than you, so let's go my way. No way. That doesn't create positive change. It may create change, but it's short-lived, it's not sustainable, and it will come back and create division at some point down the road. And I think what we're learning from John, specifically in this lesson he took away from the life of Dr. Martin Luther King, is this: we've got to listen and collaborate to create change. It's got to be inclusive for it to be sustainable, positive change.
So John he broke down his communication style. And so I listened to this, and I can't help but think that our podcast friends are listening to this too, and feeling stirred and moved to act. You know, when you hear about someone who's so inspiring and so, who just lived a life so fully engaged with what they were passionate about and what was right. And so John breaks it down into the six pieces of how Dr. King's speeches inspired people. And so he clearly had a unique gift and calling for communication and the way he interacted. And John broke each of those down and how he interacted and engaged with people. But do you think that was, you know, obviously he's a stand apart. John said he was the greatest leader in the world for the entire century. And do you think that was specifically for such a time as this, that was unique to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.? Or do you think that we are all gifted on smaller levels and called to take up the mantle in those studying Dr. King's, those 6 points that John broke down for us, and finding our own voice and way to come alongside and not wait for another once in a century leader to come along, but instead for all of us to do our part to step into those shoes. What do you think about that?
Well, so it's funny because, again, if you're watching, you see me lean right down. I'm teaching a lesson this afternoon on the law of legacy. And in this law of legacy, John teaches, and this is from the 21 Laws, and I get the privilege of communicating this in a little bit. In fact, we'll put in the show notes how you can get access to this digital product that we're creating. But John teaches in the law of legacy that legacy is when you do something so great that when you're gone, somebody wants to continue what you started. Now catch that. We're today, what, 50 years later, 60 years later, I should know my math a little bit better. 60 years later, here's what we're doing. We're dedicating two podcasts. Not just because the subject matter is still needed today, sadly, but because somebody stood up when times were the most oppressive for a group of people and said, I have a dream. And guess what, Tracy? I may not understand the culture. I may not understand the color all the time, but I share that dream that all men, every woman would be seen as equal and would have the same opportunities as each other. That is a legacy that I carry. In fact, I carry it so many times incorrectly, or I feel like I don't even qualify, but I carry that dream, that legacy. I am inspired 60 years later to continue that legacy. I'm inspired right now by John Maxwell to continue his legacy of what he learned from the life of the greatest leader of the century that he said. Because there are legacy here that from leaders. Forget the subject matter for 1 second. Don't forget it, but just set it right over here for 1 second. And here's the point in the lesson. Do something with your life so great that when you think you're done, death or weariness or whatever, that somebody is so inspired that they continue it. And that's what today we're getting to do in this lesson. We're getting to carry this legacy forward. Some of us in a much smaller, less significant role than some of you that get to carry this inspired dream. But all of us nonetheless wanting to carry this forward by this moment of taking the podcast and focusing on what leading with legacy for positive change can really be about. And I hope, Tracy, 25 years from now, in the month of February, or in the month of January, rather, in the month of January, I hope 25 years from now, you and I with a little more feeble voice is still sitting here on the podcast talking about the inspiration of the legacy of Martin Luther King, of John Maxwell, and how these leaders know how to create positive change.
That's right. We aren't meant to wait for the next big leader. We can pick up right where he left a very clear path, and John, by his life, and where John broke it down for us to study it, to learn it, and to begin to act. And I feel like this is a charge to me, leaving this podcast and preparing for the next 3 for next week. I feel like we're called to be a part of that with love, and to listen and learn, and then to lead other people through ourselves.
Yeah, you know, it's funny, Tracy, as you said that for some time, again, I think it was back at the tragic death of George Floyd, I began to say, I wanted to listen, I want to learn, and then lead. And I want to get it in that order. The order mattered to me all of a sudden. I want to listen. I want to quit talking. I want to listen because I don't understand. My culture, my environment did not give me the ability to understand without listening first. Right. And then I wanted to learn. I want to learn something. I don't want to just listen to check it off and say, now I listen to you, will you listen to me? I wanted to listen to consume something to become better. And then I would say with the third L, like a Baptist preacher, I want to lead. I want to lead. But you know what I learned from Dr. King today? Love's got to be saturated through every one of those steps.
Yeah.
It's not just listen, learn, and lead. We got to love to listen, and we got to listen to love. We got to love to learn, and we got to learn to love. We got to love to lead, and we got to lead to love. And I learned today that while I've been saying something in my attempt to lead and create positive change in a very difficult world that we've been leading in the last 2 years, I learned that today from Dr. King that I was incomplete. I don't need to just listen, learn, and lead. I need to love, listen, love, lead, love, learn, and then love, love, love some more. Because to truly value people, it's got to be wrapped and intertwined with a love for one another.
Welcome to the Maxwell Leadership Executive Podcast, where our goal is to help you increase your reputation as a leader, increase your ability to influence others, and increase your ability to fully engage your team to deliver remarkable results.